What will be your legacy?
So you would probably agree that we are here for a reason. We came into this life with a purpose. We came into this human existence, this human experience for something of meaning, something perhaps of novelty, something different, something that we could report home about and explore with curiosity the vast mystery that is the human existence. Grandiose ideas, perhaps. Regardless, what our purpose is isn't necessarily some sort of big idea, some sort of earth-shattering, civilizational, upsetting idea. It's personal, it's unique, it's individuated. And whatever that might be can change, as I've spoken about in previous videos. As it should, naturally, as we unravel and discover what is ours to discover and to learn and experience. Our path will shift and adapt and adjust, given a different perspective and a different clarity on what it is that we are now moved to pursue. So the challenge in modernity, and perhaps it's always been so, and it's different for those of us in different career paths or vocational interests, again, unique and individuated, and there's certain cultural and social values that inform this perspective and this trait about our lives, because given the circumstances you're born into, the culture and society that you live in, certain things are prioritized differently over others, right? Different values exist in different cultures based on traditions and responsibilities and the like. So what we need to discern and derive from that particular perspective is how we're going to go about pursuing that which satisfies our soul. How are we to pursue that which fulfills us deeply? How are you going to fill your day with high priority, high value activities and defer the rest to something or someone else so that you can focus your energies and that you can be fulfilled and not fill your days and hours with things that are of low value, things that draw you away, sap your energy, distract, and otherwise deter you from pursuing that which is truly enriching to your spirit and truly satisfactory to your soul's purpose for being here in the first place. Dr. John Demartini. I'll link his website and some information below this video. You've probably heard of him. He's been working in this transformational coaching type of arena for decades, probably close to 50 years now. And he's constantly offering a similar style of content because it works. What he does, what he offers works, and you can't really say anything differently from what he has derived over decades of experience, thousands of classes, live and interactive and workshops, and of course, reading probably thousands of books on various interests as he has. And he's got quite an interesting story, which if you have a chance to listen to one of his interviews where it's biographical, I would recommend that, because it's probably not what you would expect, and it could be inspiring. Everyone has their battles and their mountains to climb, their things to overcome, and their demons to exercise in this life. And we invite and manifest and create those things for ourselves. I spoke about the trickster and the spiritual adversary that we have, all of which is just a mirroring of an aspect of ourselves so that we can pursue and test ourselves at every step of the way, and to shock ourselves awake occasionally if we're getting a little lazy and complacent and down in the doldrums and perhaps stuck in some sort of spiral thinking that leads us to depression and that type of low-level behavior and existence too often. I mentioned Michael Neal in a previous video, and I think he's got the Catalyst Cafe, I can't remember. I'll link his information below here as well. But similarly, we're only one thought away from a completely new perspective, a new perception, and a new way to perceive life and how thought itself works, and the whole purpose of living from the inside out as opposed to the outside in, which is potentially quite transformational. And I talk about how God works with you, not for you, and that's along the same lines. It all comes from within, and thoughts are transient and transitory things that you have no control over. And once you learn to name and call them out for what they are, you dispel their energy, you diffuse any sort of influence they might have over you, whether it's negative and even positive, because you can, bliss out by thinking certain things as well, which may or may not be good for you and may or may not help you pursue the things that are of true, authentic interest. Again, to do that satisfactory soul work that you're here to do. But getting back to the more practical ideas of how you're going to pursue these things, that can be a great challenge for many of us, especially, and of course this is biased because from my perspective, I've always been artistically inclined. From when I was very young, I was musical, played numerous instruments, and had the idea of pursuing a career in music as a performing artist, as a recording artist. And to a degree, I have satisfied those things. I've written hundreds and hundreds of songs over the years and finished only a small percentage of that. And that's probably the same for most artists out there. You have a certain time in your life when you're rather prolific and that energy is flowing, and perhaps you have the time and the means to be able to transform these ideas into some sort of savable medium, whether it's on paper or I had a keyboard that was a gift from my mother at one point that finally it's allowed me to save ideas, to compose things, and to be able to put sequences together to create full songs. And I was able to save these things to floppy disks, if you want to believe that. And a lot of these ideas are stuck on those old disks from 30 something years ago because the machine doesn't work properly and I'm unable to retrieve these things, which is kind of sad because I certainly had the time over the last 2 to 3 decades to do something about that, but life got in the way, as it were. This is the struggle that can be very real for anyone. You don't have to be artistic. It could be any particular career path. But the artistic one is generally, the creative one is a fairly non-standard one, right? And so it comes with a unique set of challenges that don't exist in, say, pursuing a career as a teacher or a plumber, electrician, architecture, these kind of things. The careers and vocations that are tangible and based in the trades, let's say, they're not necessarily easier, but there's a linear progression. And there can be the same, of course, with artistry and the creative paths as well, because there are specialized schools and there are mentors and people that can help you get organized and stay on that path and to be disciplined to pursue that dream. But the issue is more on the practical side of things, is that you can't necessarily do it all yourself. You have to do it, you're driven to do it, you're motivated to do it, but you can't do everything yourself. You can't necessarily have a homestead and grow your own food and farm and then take care of children perhaps, and then find ways to earn a living to pay for that particular lifestyle or take care of your property, pay for taxes, and then find time to put into your music, to put in 2 to 3 hours a day to practice an instrument if you want to be part of an orchestra or symphony, that kind of thing. That's where the choice comes in. That's where you have to choose and prioritize what it is you truly want in this life, because we borrow ideas, inspirations, and priorities and values from others, especially in our early years. And these tend to define our behavior and belief propensities throughout the rest of our lives if we don't ever challenge them or work diligently to rewrite them and to overwrite them with something more authentic to our story, to our purpose. So you need to do it, you have to do it, but you can't necessarily do it all yourself. One of the mistakes I've made in this life is trying to do that on myself because I used the excuse of not having any money to be able to pay people. So whether it was guilt or some other misplaced idea of obligation, I just taught myself to do most things, whether it was graphic design or web design or, doing everything that I could do to set up the business or bank accounts, everything to do with recording, producing music, composing music, playing all the instruments, singing all the vocals, etc., everything essentially, right? The one-man band, but spilling over into every other aspect of life, which can be debilitating and fatiguing, of course, because you're scattered all over the place, you're fragmented, you're fragmenting your creative energy and trying to prepare. But again, if you want to be a professional vocalist, performing artist, or any sort of specific thing that is going to create the opportunities for you to excel when every other person, in that creative field wants to perhaps do the same thing, those who will commit to the 2 to 3 to 4 hours a day of specialty in any particular field, any particular type of instrument or performing will likely generate those ideas of luck and opportunities coming their way because they've prepared for it, because they're ready for it, because they're not going to be panic-stricken and terrified should somebody offer them something such as a gig or a high-profile opportunity, whatever it might be. And then, of course, your trajectory will be affected by that. Your trajectory will go onward and upward because that is you following through what your soul's desire was and committing to it, putting aside other things that could have distracted, this can be pretty extreme. You can put aside relationships or starting a family. You can put aside financial stability and the practicalities and responsibilities of a typical life. And necessarily so, of course, because there are only so many hours in a day, so many days in a year, and so many years in one short human life. So that could be what's necessary for you to pursue what is most dear and most satisfactory and satisfying to your purpose and reason for being here. Dr. Demartini talks frequently about delegation. If you're not filling your day with high priority activities, things that are of highest value, you're going to fill it with these lower value, lower priority things. And of course, many of those things are practical things, such as cooking a meal, feeding yourself, such as perhaps growing food or even doing shopping. And for someone like himself, he doesn't even drive a car. He has somebody drive him because he never learned, he doesn't need to, and he doesn't have the time to. It probably affords him a lot more time if and when he's actually on dry land. I think he spends most of his life on his boat. And so when he is driving around, somebody drives him. And that's just an extreme example, but perhaps it's not so extreme. Everything that you can delegate to somebody else, and there are professionals and people that enjoy those particular jobs. And if you have the means with which, of course, to pay someone, such as, someone to take care of the practicalities around your home and cooking meals or preparing meals, or, the alternative we have nowadays is the Ubers and the home deliveries and the Amazons, right? So more and more of these things can be handled in such a way, but I think that's also a strange way of living a shut-in sort of life and isolation. That's probably not a good thing either. But the point is that you want to try and delegate these things if you can, as much as you can, so that frees up your time to focus on the highest priority, highest value activities that you can be doing. And then, as he's frequently saying too, you want to measure your activity, what worked, what didn't work, what can we perhaps do a little differently tomorrow. And these are all wonderful ideas, and I've certainly attempted at different phases of my life to implement them, and with marginal and mixed results. Again, this is from my perspective, but I have kind of a bohemian sort of lifestyle. I like to live sort of extemporaneously as I'm doing these videos too. It's an idea that popped in my head this morning as I was climbing up this little mountain. What about speaking about the idea of soul's purpose and how we have to and need to do something, but how do we go about practically doing that type of thing? It's complex, but it's also simple, just like most things. It's very simple, that soul's urge, that desire, that something that pulls, that impulse, that summoned from within, that we probably felt some sort of pull towards in our childhood and our younger years, and perhaps got pulled away from for a time, which can be good, because there's foundational things and psychological things and emotional maturity and spiritual maturity that might have to happen before you can fully dive in to what it is you are here to do, whatever that might be. And it doesn't have to be any single specific thing, but you know it when you think about it. You know it when you feel into it, right? You know it when it's something that nobody needs to remind you that you need to do it. It's something that's just as automatic and easy as breathing. It's just something that comes naturally to, if you have the time, the space, and the tools that you need, you don't think about it. You just start doing it. You just start creating or pursuing or building or whatever it is that you're doing naturally. You don't have to question it, right? It's built in. It's hardwired. Like for me, at any time I can pick up a guitar and start playing. I can sing along with one of my songs, or I can open up one of my old project files and mix and master and release a song if I chose to. And there's, probably a dozen projects that are sitting and waiting for my attention, should I get to them and when. But that was also a different phase of my life that started early, and that there were inspirations and ideas of why I wanted to pursue music, and the whole idea was awakening the masses and to uplift and inspire people to, again, just like I do now with my writing, with these videos, with the GPT chats, with my books that I'm starting to publish. It's all about shaking up the narrative. It's all about shaking people awake from their stupor and believing in the mainstream and the lies and distortions and the narratives that are force-fed into our consciousness, and how they're potentially debilitating and veiling that which is real and true and authentic about who we are, what we can get out of this life, and what we're doing here. So music was one of those outlets, and it was a passionate one. So it's not so much finding your passion, because just like that eternal spark that exists, that immortal within, it's always been there. It's always there if you settle and stop thinking for a moment. It's not so much meditating, but it's actually just literally stopping everything so that you can allow that truth to emerge and float back to the surface of your consciousness. Stuff that you're putting aside, setting aside because life and responsibilities and parenting and whatever came up distracted you and pulled you away from it potentially. And it's a convenient excuse for most of us, of course, but it is an excuse nonetheless. And one thing that we forget as parents, I'm not a parent, but in my experience and growing up with parents who acted and behaved in a certain way, we forget that the children, your children, learn from what you do, not from what you say, not from what you tell them to do. So how you live, what you do, what you're pursuing, that's how they're learning. That's how they are being conditioned and programmed. And they will no doubt behave in a specific kind of relative manner, because that's what was mentored and modeled for them. Whether it's in career, whether it's in your relationship with your partner, whether it is in just what you eat and how you present yourself, how you talk to people, whether you're honest, whether you're lying, whether you're, manipulating people, whatever it might be, all of these things will inform how your children ultimately are formed. And until such time that they take it upon themselves to come into their own personalities and their own identities, all of it came from you in the first place. So, something to think about. My father was a musician of sorts, and from the 70s, when we lived out, before I existed, he moved to Canada in the 60s. I believe it was 1967. He had always had interest in music from his youth and had always played an accordion. And so, of course, he formed a band with fellow Croatian friends in Ontario, and they played for cultural dances and otherwise, learning the pop songs of the day, singing with horrible accents as they did, but nevertheless, it was music, Western music mixed with their traditional music, the polkas, waltzes mixed with the Canadian and American rock songs of the time. And there was, of course, a lot of great music in the 60s and 70s, and a lot better than what's available for the most part today. Some real soulful music that used to be produced in the mainstream 60s, 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s. It was a path that was relegated to the side for him, right? It was a side gig. It was a side hustle because, when you're a cover band, you're not likely going to be making a living from these things. But it was always a passion and always an interest. And much later in life, I remember him taking lessons to improve his accordion playing, something he probably put off for, 15, 20 years because fatherhood came along, I came along, which changed the adventure for him and my mother, and certainly derailed certain things that he might have had in store as planned. And then moving out west kind of tore him away from that friendship, from that family that he'd built with that band and those fellow musicians. And I know he had those friends for life and was still in contact with them up until his, a couple of days before he passed, which is amazing. Those kind of friendships are extremely rare. So to be able to find that kind of camaraderie, and I know he always missed that, and what he'd found there out east was something precious and powerful and unique. And whether or not it became a great success, it was about that collaboration, that camaraderie that he had with those friends and fellow countrymen who'd made a new life in Canada. So did that satisfy his soul's desire? Did that satisfy his life's purpose? I don't know. We never got into any deep conversations, he and I, and we never had a very close relationship. We had an understanding, and we had certainly a similar personality in ways, and I probably was more inspired to pursue music because it was there, it was available, and it came naturally to me. I could pick up drumsticks and start playing drums. I could pick up a guitar and start playing guitar, saxophone, clarinet, and then eventually I started singing. And these things, for me, I didn't have to think about it. It just came naturally, and I think eventually I did them fairly well, and I quite enjoyed it. It was that natural outlet for me to be able to throw creative energy into, to throw emotionality and express ideas and concerns about the world and people and relationships and love and everything else that we write music and lyrics and poetry for. The whole purpose of the arts, is to satisfy the soul of the world and the soul, and to touch those who aren't necessarily creative, but everybody everywhere understands and appreciates music, whether it's pop, whether it's orchestral, symphonic, whether it's choral, whether it's tribal, it doesn't matter. Everyone relates to that vibration on some level. Of course, coming out west, he did find other bands or groups, performing acts to be a part of. He played with the German band for the German club, and we had a small family band, which was primarily himself and I, and different bass players, occasionally a guitar player that came with us. But with a three-piece, we were able to play all kinds of music and give the people something to dance to. And it allowed me to hide behind the drums and just get into the rhythm of things and enjoy that part of it. As a shy kid that I was, it allowed me to express these things and even make a little money in the process. But there's no better practice than actually being in front of people and showing your wares and showing your music and putting yourself out there. But it wasn't my music. It was just, the family band and playing for, summer parties or Christmas parties, New Year's parties, whatever. That kind of generic sort of thing you'd expect to do. And for me to play the traditional, Croatian and Slovenian and German and Italian music mixed with basically the same 70s rock that he'd used to play, which of course was danceable music, and that's why it was brought forth and essentially timeless. It's that danceable era of music that you could play and people could enjoy, and different age groups, but generally the older crowd, right? So that began the process for me to pursue the music. And then my own life and my own path had its own intrusions, impositions, distractions, and everything else that took me on or off the path. And I've certainly tried. I've given it different stabs over the years in different ways, but I'm not sure if that's ever been entirely satisfied, but I'm not entirely clear what exactly that was meant to be. As I said, I wrote hundreds of songs. I produced numerous albums, all myself, all on my own. They could have been better, certainly, if I had collaborators and if I had committed to finding a way to, pay some professionals to mix or master things. That's the same with any kind of creative path, right? But it's still a very personal thing, and it was a matter of pride to be able to do it all myself as well. Because, you hear a song, you hear an idea in a certain way, and that's how you ultimately produce it and put it together, and the final result is essentially some sort of creation that is at least close to what you'd intended to do, right? But it's honest, it's real, it's authentic. It's me. That's me. That song is me. That's how it came out. And these things are probably similar when it comes to, say, writing novels, fictions, maybe even nonfiction. We have our voice, we have our way of presenting ideas. And now with my writing over the last 20-ish years with the website, it's gone through different iterations. I wiped everything clean, I think 2015, and I started writing in a different way, in a more cohesive way. And in recent years, I went through and revamped and revised things, deleted things that didn't really resonate with me anymore, or were stuck in a certain particular time, which, I try to make things more evergreen nowadays when I do write and publish and produce them, so that 20, 30, 40 years from now, trying to get to the principles of things, not any specific ideas, which eventually, will show up more as a synthesis of ideas over time, over years, over decades. But, over the last 5 years, I wrote a lot of stuff about the COVID fraud and the COVID hoax, right? And that's obviously specific to a time, and many of those things will probably get deleted or refined and altered in a way that will be a little more timeless, because there are underlining principles, underlining ideas, the psychic attack, the mind control, the propagandizing, the cartel medicine, impositions, everything that was done to injure and harm individuals and communities and families and economies, the transfer of wealth, all of these things. I mean, there's big ideas and small ideas that underlie, and they're through lines to all of these events that happen throughout history. And the history that I've lived, I try and synthesize and put forth ideas and truth nuggets and gems and whatever you want to call them, truth bombs, elements that I try and pull out from all of these things, and to try and better understand the human condition, to try and better amplify the light, to shed light on the shadows and the darkness and the evil, mostly for myself, right? Most of these things that we write are notes to self. We're writing them as a way to just reconcile these conflicts and contrasts. So we put them out there. And as I said, in the last decade, I'd go write these things, then go back and revise and update. And then I published my first book this year, which was based on things written in 2015, 2016, I believe. And so I have a number of books that I'd like to produce and publish in that regard, based on things I've written over the last decade. And I continue to write. And now with Chat GPT, that's a whole ton of new content, which may or may not work as something for a book format. I'm not sure. But, it's very easy to have a chat back and forth with a top tier AI such as GPT, and to be able to come up with a 20, 30 minute read, 5, 6, 7,000 words, it wouldn't take very long to fill a book. And I've had upwards of 60 of these chats now of varying length on all sorts of topics, similar topics that I'm always writing and talking about anyways. So again, down the road, I may go back, revisit, revise, and edit these things into some sort of a narrative or a book format, which might be useful, in my view, to others. Perhaps harkening back to what happened in 2025 when a lot of these technologies were exploding onto the scene. And of course, you can't believe everything that GPT puts forth either, right? So it's a constant challenge for me to not simply accept everything that's coming at me, to challenge the ideas, to challenge my own assumptions, and to challenge, the narrative that it's spewing out toward me when we're having these chats. So, music turned into the writing, which was just another way of writing more in long format, and a little bit of poetry interspersed there, which I could probably do more of. And that's my way of expressing what my soul's desire is in this world. My life's work is what it feels like. And now adding these videos and different forms of content, sharing it across different media outlets and social media, that is what I'm moved and inspired to do. And it is what I generally prioritize, even over earning a living and doing practical things that allows me to sustain myself in a certain lifestyle. But that's my default, right? So for me, that's that choice to default to what I've always been moved to do, what the impulse is moving me and coming through me to express these ideas and to synthesize information from all the podcasts and interviews and books and ideas that I read. Eventually, all of these things collate into something that maybe is useful, and I feel that need to express it and to share it with you, the reader, the listener, the viewer. So my hope is that some of these things are uplifting and actually amplifying the light and actually of service to humanity, because that's why I'm here. So the most important question when it comes to satisfying that soul's desire is, what do you really want? We need to remind ourselves probably on the daily of these things, because there are so many distractions with the screens and the technology and the TV shows and the compensatory ways that we live and the coping mechanisms just dealing with life. But if we don't ask ourselves what we truly and most deeply and honestly want, we'll never really know what to prioritize, what activities are going to be of the highest value, highest priority to be doing every day. We'll just fall into habits. We'll fall into spiral thinking that just hurts and harms us and keeps us sad and depressed and angry, judging the world and spitting at the screen when we see a crooked or ridiculous politician spewing some complete and total nonsense on the screen, as they do every single fucking day. It's never going to be otherwise. That's the nature of that system. That's the nature of that game. Buy into it all you want. Believe in voting if you want. Believe in democracy if you're dumb enough to do so. But that's not real. You don't want... That's a whole other topic. I'm not going to get into it now. Maybe I'll do a specific video related to the idea of democracy and the joke that it is, especially in the modern Western Empire. Ask yourself what it is that you really and truly want. And that question can only be answered in silence. That question can only be answered away from screens, away from distractions, away from noise, away from anything in your ears, away from any and all inputs. That still small voice can only emerge in those spaces between distractions, the space between thoughts and ideas to produce and create and get busy. What do you want to get busy about? What do you want to get your fingers into? What is that soul desire? What is the real and true and authentic thing that you are supposed to be doing? And ask yourself every day, and it'll probably be a little clearer every time you ask, or it'll come instantly. Trust it and see if it's true. Test it. Test it for yourself. See if it's even legit. Prioritize your activities. Delegate what you can, if not everything, so that you can focus on it and see what it even means. What can come of that? What if you really go all in? What if you dive in and just set everything else aside and fully commit to it? Will life support you in that? Will family support you? Maybe. Will your partner and kids support you? Maybe. But it's you. It's for you. It's because of you. It is your reason to be. Try. See what happens. Have a good one.